Hey y'all, it's me, Dree. I'm just gonna get right into it today. In the last part of this series, I left y'all in the place I was living from by the end of October of 2020. I was in defeat, wasn't in strength. I certainly wasn't in clarity. I was not some empowered woman where I understood everything and knew exactly what was going on or what to do with where I stood. That is not where I was. I was defeated. I was exhausted. I was still fighting the cancer. I was still fighting for my marriage. And I was still very much holding on to the belief that my husband was going to come back, return to himself and to me and my girls. Because at that point, I did not believe my marriage was ending. I believed we were in the first truly hard season of our lives together. We had spent, Eleanor, come here. We had spent almost all of 9 years together by this point. And I believed at that time that my cancer diagnosis had changed the whole atmosphere. And I did. I believed the money was changing him. At this time, he was not yet making ample amount of money, but he was making more money than he had made before. And more than the money, he was in that environment of money. And that, I believed, being in an environment of successful men and energy like that, I believed that it was getting to him. I thought it was going to his head. And I believed that somewhere along the way, something had gotten distorted for him. But even though I believed those things, I did not yet believe that the life I had built with him was over. And I think that distinction matters, because when people look at stories like this from the outside, they always want to ask or say that the person shouldn't have stayed. But when you are inside of a situation like I was, you are not looking at the situation from the ending point. You're certainly not looking at it from the beginning point. It's more, you're looking at it from the middle. And in that middle point, I still thought there was something to save. So by November of that same year, my treatments had finally come to an end. And if you have never had cancer, that probably sounds like great news. It probably sounds like the moment life starts getting better, that you flip the switch back on. That's the moment you get to move on. You rang that bell and you get your life back. But I gotta say, that is not how cancer worked for me. Ending treatment was not the ending of cancer for me. It was more the beginning of my surviving the cancer. Yes, the effects did come during treatment, but compared to what they became, nobody prepared me for how much worse my body was going to feel after that treatment ended. It was like they had killed literally, and I think they did, every cell in my body, and my body was having to restore itself from nothing. And during that, my body was carrying me through the surgeries, through the chemotherapy, through all the medical appointments, which were so far away. I had so much medication, bottles and bottles. My body was carrying the fear, the survival. And once the treatment stopped, well, I think what happened is that my body finally collapsed under the weight of everything that it was enduring and carrying. I had nothing left. Every movement that I tried to make hurt. It wasn't discomfort. It wasn't hurt I could move through. It was pain. The kind of pain that follows you everywhere through your whole body. It ricochets. The kind of pain that makes bending over and getting up impossible. I had to have help. It was the kind of pain that makes turning the wrong way, like that was a very bad mistake. My pain had gotten so severe that I had to be referred to pain management just to help me function. And when they referred me, the doctors acted like par for the course, no big deal. And while my body was declining, at that time I was preparing for another surgery. This time it was a hysterectomy. You see, my cancer, it was hormone fed. So the medical approach with me was to remove the part of my body producing the most of my hormones. And that was my reproductive system. And I guess I want to pause on that because I really want you to take in and understand what that felt like to me. Because I had already lost my breasts. And when I lost my breasts, I lost my nipples. I lost all my hair. And every time I looked in the mirror, I felt like the body I saw did not belong to me anymore. And since my reconstruction in February, I could feel the way my husband looked at me when I wasn't dressed, and I could feel that something had shifted in how he perceived me. I don't know. I guess I felt like Frankenstein. No hair, no nipples, huge lacerations that didn't look like they were ever going to fade away. I had a body that had been cut open and reconstructed. A lot of people say, oh, you have breast cancer, you get a boob job. That's not what I received. And I had a husband who seemed affected by looking at me. And now this one thing, my reproductive system that still made me feel connected to my identity as a woman, that had to go too. So that was not just a surgery for me. That was grief. It was another removal of another part of my body. It was another surrender. It was another piece of myself that cancer was demanding it took from me. And at the very same time, my marriage was deteriorating. But the part I want to explain carefully, my marriage felt like it was declining fast, but my body was declining faster than my marriage was. But in order to keep fighting for my marriage, I had to keep removing what was happening to my body from the living equation of what was going on. Because my husband was not empathetic around sickness. He was one of those that said, the bell has rung. Why have you not made me dinner? And that's the way that he had always been. I had seen this in him before. His dad had been fighting very serious cancer the last year we lived in California, and my husband would not go to see him. And at almost the very same time, his mom was fighting a massive blood disease. She was fighting for over a year for her life, and not only did he not go to see her, he barely even addressed it. I used to push him. I'd say, go see your parents. They are fighting for their lives. What if you don't see them again? And his response was just always detached and cold. With his dad, he would say things like, he deserves it. And with his mom, he just would not engage, like it wasn't happening or something. And I always found those things strange, even while we were in our younger years together and still evolving. Even while I still believed in who we were, there were things that I had noticed. There were dots that I had connected about him. So when cancer entered my own life, I already knew that this was going to be difficult for him. I knew sickness did something to him in his core. I knew illness made him detach. I knew vulnerability did not bring out tenderness in him. And when my diagnosis happened, that was the catalyst. But also the money, that became the fuel. Because by this time, John was making more money than he had ever made in his life. He had not reached his true pinnacle of his time yet. That would come later. But he was making enough money that something in him started inflating, and I think it was the environment he was in all day. But with every dollar he made above the last, the more terrible he became as a person. He talked like the world was beneath him. And suddenly, me, with a 24-year career, doing what he was doing, I suddenly became beneath him also. He was always lecturing. Always correcting everyone, always explaining. He was always making himself bigger than everybody else while making everyone else feel so small. And by then, those lectures were not just happening with me. They were extending into his garage parties. He was having these all-night benders with the neighbors. They would stay up all night, drinking, talking, holding court. I would go to bed early, but while I was still awake, I would be in there, and I would just see him chop people down while amplifying himself up like he was some natural born professional at life. And the thing was, all those people he was projecting onto, those people were new to his world. They did not know the history. They did not know what had been built behind the scenes. They did not know that I was the reason that the structure he was now standing on even existed. All these people were just seeing the version of him with money, confidence, and a goddamn microphone. And all the people around him, all the people on our whole reality, all the people we had met from when we landed in 2019 to now, almost the beginning of 2021, all of them, they were all eating it up. They were all seeing his value. And they were not seeing mine. I was not considered. And I don't know. I had always been humble about the money I made. I had always been humble about what I carried and what I did for a living, for a life. I had been carrying this family for almost 9 years. And my flag had still been up in the wind for 13 years before that. I was not stupid. I knew exactly what I was watching happen. I just did not understand it yet, where he was actually taking it. And I was so fucking sick that I didn't really care. At the time, I chalked it up to money. I chalked it up to his ego I thought he was not handling success well at all. I thought he was being inflated by the new job, by the attention, by the garage culture he had built and established. The fact that people were listening to him, he was eating it up. But looking back now, I can see something else was happening at that very same time too. You see, when I got sick, when I knew I was going to be out for the count, I sculpted the perfect plan to help us survive financially. I did what I always did. I solved the problem. I created a structure. And I figured out how to keep us afloat while my health collapsed. And I did all of that before I even started dealing with the cancer itself. And as this man's wife, as his partner, of course I trusted him with the keys. I trusted this man with my life. I had been giving him all the money I was making anyway. But what had shifted? It was the access point. Because he no longer had to go through me to access the system. The source stopped providing in the same way because, well, the source was sick. And once he got that direct access, something began showing itself more and more. But at the time, all I could see was the absurd behavior, the arrogance, the lectures, the detachment, and the cruelty. I still just could not see the full truth of it. We had been with each other almost 9 years by then. So surely a few terrible months were not going to be the thing that ended us. Like, this was literally like a little more than a 6-gap window that he completely changed. And I thought surely it was a season. I thought surely my storybook ending was going to resume after I got better. Because I'm not a person that leaves things when they get hard. I never have been. I was born loyal. Even in my first marriage, I became instantly the ride or die. Even when he was the criminal, I was the one that stayed loyal to him, went to the jails, followed him through the system, gave him a loving home when he returned. That was always a part of who I am. Because when I commit, I commit. And when things get difficult, my instinct is not to run and it's not to leave. My instinct is to fight harder. And with my husband, that instinct was even deeper than that, because he was my second marriage and he was supposed to be the one that worked. Before all of this change, I believed he had saved my life from what my first marriage turned me into. This was my storybook ending after everything I had already lived through before the cancer. This man had moved me 1,500 miles away from my whole entire reality. We had just gotten to Texas. We had just set our stage. I had built a life here that I could manage. And I had bought into the dream, literally. It was all on me. And then cancer crippled me. It hit me financially. It crippled my body. It made the reality I had just built feel impossible to carry by myself. I had 2 small children. So when things started falling apart with him, I was not thinking about leaving. I was thinking about how to save it. I was thinking about how to get my husband back to reality. I thought maybe he was a sickness phobe. I thought maybe he could not handle medical vulnerability. And I thought maybe he was acting like a baby in the face of something serious. And I can even say that I have my own thing about seeing a man act like a baby. So yes, I was aware that it was present, but I was not awake. I saw pieces. I saw fragments because all I could see was the middle that we were standing in. I did not see the ending. I did not see his treatment of me. I saw his detachment. Again, I saw the arrogance. I saw the way the money was changing him. But I did not see my story as dangerous on all the levels it actually was. I did not see that medicating myself the way that I was through cancer with toxic components was dangerous. I did not see that my body, my marriage, my finances, and my reality were all collapsing at the same time. I could not see that. I grew up in a physically abusive home, and in my childhood, I had also seen somebody who was hostile, aggressive, and abusive change their life. The abuser in my family had a life-altering event, and when they recovered from that, the abuse that my family was experiencing on their hand, it all stopped. So I very much knew abuse could exist, but I also knew change could happen too. And that is what shaped how I saw things. When my husband started being aggressive with me, I did not measure it against a healthy measurement, a healthy marriage. I measured it against what I had already experienced as a family and what I had survived. And because at that time I thought I was the only victim in what my husband's behavior had become, it did not register the same way. So no, I was not seeing the full picture. And if I had known then what I know now, everything would have gone differently. But all I can say is that I did not. I only knew what I knew. And what I knew was that my marriage was in trouble. My body, that was in danger. And I still believed there was something left to save. Then one Saturday morning came. My pre-op appointment for my hysterectomy, that was coming up the following week. My girls were home with me that Saturday morning. My husband was still asleep in bed. He had been doing what had become normal by this time, staying up all night in the garage with the neighbors, partying until 5 or 6 in the morning. But on this Saturday, my babies were home. And all I cared about that morning was waking up, being a family, going to breakfast, and pretending for just 1 minute for those little girls that we were all happy. I was trying to be in better spirits, and they made it easy. I was so happy they were home with me again. And all I wanted was some normalcy, something soft, something that felt like the people that we were before what we had become. And by this time, my husband had taken over the whole master bedroom, so I told the girls, let's go sneak into Daddy's room. I told them I would whisper softly and lovingly so he could wake up to his baby girls. The babies he had not really been seeing in so long by this time. So the girls were excited. I was excited. And I was hopeful. We all tiptoed into his room. We stayed quiet. We walked softly. And when I got to the side of the bed, I whispered in the same loving voice I always had, because he and I had always been on different sleep schedules. I knew how to wake him up softly. And so I said something like, Daddy, wake up. It's a beautiful day. Whatever I said, he did not receive it as loving or kind, which is what I had intended. And as fast as I said those words, he shuffled himself around in the bed and sat up. And before I knew it, he was still wrapped in his blanket, but he had somehow shifted his legs completely around my body and around my neck. He pushed me and my head and my shoulders onto the bed. And he put me in a chokehold with his legs. He had very long legs. He was 6'4". And those legs, they were still wrapped in his blanket. So when his legs wrapped around my neck, the blanket wrapped around it too. And I am a very claustrophobic person. My husband knows that about me the most. That is one of our no-go territories. But he went there, and when I started to panic and I realized I could not breathe, I remember going to squeeze his legs, to pull on his leg hair, to get him to stop, but I couldn't. I couldn't even squeeze his leg to say that I was in trouble. My scream was being muffled in the blankets. And then, just for a second, everything went black. I remembered that I could not breathe. I remembered that I could not get air. And I do not know what made him stop when he did. But the next thing that I remembered, I was on the ground on the side of the bed, gasping, coughing uncontrollably, trying to pull the air back into my body. And he didn't even have a reaction. And that whole situation that whole feeling, that whole encounter, that did not leave my body fast. This encounter was not like an argument. It was not like a lecture. It was not just another moment where he was nasty to me. Because my body experienced that. And my body remembered it. And after everything my body had already been through that year, the cancer, the surgeries, the chemo, the pain, I was there preparing for another surgery, and now my body had also experienced not being able to breathe. I got up from the floor and left the room with my girls, vulnerable, unsettled. I felt like my safety was not okay. And that was not because I had been walking around afraid of him every single day, because I had not. Most of the fear I carried was about myself and my well-being. I was afraid of what was happening inside of my body that nobody could give two cares about. I was afraid of the cancer. I was afraid of surgery. I was afraid of dying. And with my husband, I was confused. I was walking on eggshells, feeling frustrated, mostly feeling disappointed. But I was still trying to make sense of what had happened to him. But after that Saturday morning when he choked me the way that he did, something in me stayed unsettled. So I packed up my girls. My mom was still in town, and she was meeting with friends she had in a nearby area. She was trying to give us space and stay out of the way for the day so that we could be a happy family. So after this moment that we all shared, the girls and I went to my mom's friend's house, and together we just burst out. We started expressing the moments we had experienced with my husband's aggression towards me. And I remember in those moments, the relief I could see in my daughter's faces and hear in their voices as they recounted the versions of events they had witnessed in just the few short times they had been left in the house alone with me and him. I could hear my girls. They were feeling seen. And it made me understand that relief only comes when something that has been trapped finally gets spoken. And I could see that in my little girls, and I could feel that in myself. It was not just me talking anymore. It was not just my experience living inside my own head. My little girls had seen things. They had felt things. They had been carrying things. And in that room, for the first time, all three of us were describing the same reality. Not perfectly, not fully, and not with the clarity that we all have now, but enough. Enough to know something had to change. When I told my mom what exactly had happened, she understood the seriousness immediately. She said that that was exactly the way to kill somebody. She said that if he had held on just a little longer, I maybe would have not gotten up at all. And hearing that from her in front of my kids, that shook me. Because I was in that moment still processing it as my marriage. But my mom, when she heard it, she was hearing it as my life. And I can see now that those are two very different positions to stand in. But even at that time, I did not leave that moment thinking my marriage was over. I left that moment knowing something had crossed a line. I left that moment knowing we needed help. And I think that was when my husband agreed to start marriage counseling, which at that time, to me, felt like hope. It felt like maybe he understood that things could not keep happening the way that they were. It felt like maybe we were finally going to get help after all. Because I was not looking for an exit from my commitment to my husband. I was looking for my husband. I was looking for the man I had built a life with. I was looking for the storybook ending I still believed could come back to me. And I was looking for a way to survive cancer and still have my family standing on the other side of it. And sometimes when I look back, I think my fight for my marriage, that very may well have been one of the reasons I survived cancer at all. Not because the marriage was saving me, but because I was still fighting for something. I was still reaching for my future with him. I was still believing there was a life waiting for us after my treatment, after my surgeries, after the pain was gone, and after the hard season ended. I was wrong about what that life would look like. But I was not wrong to fight for my life. And I just need somebody who is listening right now to understand this. Just because you stay, that does not mean your story is over. And just because you were not strong enough to leave in one moment, that does not mean you missed your only opportunity to become strong later. Just because you loved somebody through something they did not deserve to be loved through does not mean your reality ends there. And I'm going to say, again, I stayed because that is who I was. I stayed because I was loyal. I stayed because I did not leave when times get tough. I stayed because I had already lived through one failed marriage. And the last thing I was going to do was let my storybook ending leave while I was out for the count. and without fighting for it. So I stayed because my clarity was not showing me the irreparable truth of what I was in. I stayed because I still believed the man I married was somewhere inside of the man standing in front of me. And I believed that the man in front of me would change for me. But what I did not understand yet was that my staying would later be used against me. Because when my husband wrote his version of this story that I'm telling, he said my unwillingness to walk away proved his innocence. As if staying means nothing was wrong. As if love cannot make someone stay. As if hope cannot make someone stay. Or as if cancer, children, money, distance from family, loyalty, and a life built 1,500 miles away from everything familiar does not complicate the word leave. But I will say this clearly. I was not staying because nothing happened. I was staying because I still believed something could be fixed. This was not even a year time span from beginning to end. And that is the distortion. That is what people on the outside do not understand. Sometimes you can see a person's behavior, but you cannot see the outcome. Sometimes you know something is wrong or not right, but you do not know how wrong or how extensive it gets. Sometimes you are not blind. You are just standing too close to the life you built to understand that it is collapsing underneath you. And that was where I was. I was aware. I was not awake. I was unsettled. I was still hopeful. I was in so much pain, mostly physical. The emotional was wearing on me. But nonetheless, I was still fighting. And after that Saturday morning, after that event in my husband's bedroom, after leaving with my girls and hearing them speak, after hearing my mother's reaction, my husband suggested that we start marriage counseling when I got home. And for all the things I was expecting to hear or the way things could have gone, I thought in that time that maybe this was the beginning of our repair. That was the only way. We were coming back from that moment. But really, I don't know what that really was. It was the beginning of the next layer. Because this reality I was in, it doesn't have just one layer. There were many, many layers. And that's where I'm gonna leave this one for now, because the next part of this story is where trying to save my marriage starts colliding with everything else I had still not uncovered about the man I was living my life with. So that's where we'll pick up on the next one. I'm sending you the love, and I'm sending you all the light. I'll see y'all again soon.